Welcome back to another episode of Clothing Brief. Today, we've got a handful of topics picked out for you to discuss, of course, the latest and most fascinating briefs within the news this week. We're going to dive right in with one of our favorite topics of sustainability. The EU, after reporting for some time now, several stories of the launch of the digital passport, and even last week talking about their pushback on fast fashion, bringing more regulations in to minimize waste and increase transparency on products that are coming in. All of a sudden, we've got a retraction going on, a very, I would say, contradictory landslide. What is going on with this greenwashing backslide happening in the EU, and what can we expect?
I don't think it's a backslide. I think it's more of a
Really?
reality check. There are
Okay.
both sides that are having different conversations about this green claims directive that's been kind of pulled back. The directive was put out in addition to all these other things that they're trying to do to reduce carbon footprint and pollution. And I think those are noble
Right.
causes, and you've got to give them a lot of credit for trying to make change. And the Green Claims Directive was really to push organizations that are claiming that they're eco-friendly or green to have verifiable information and evidence to meet this carbon neutral or biodegradable, and eliminate companies from kind of falsifying.
Uh-huh.
All of
Right.
that makes great sense, except for
Not so
when
easy.
it's super difficult.
Yeah.
Prop 65 in California is a similar kind of deal.
Mm,
Well intended, but very cumbersome for organizations to comply with all of these things, especially organizations that we would call, and Europe's full of them, as you know, micro businesses, smaller
yes.
businesses. They become too expensive. So I think it's a matter of rediscussing next steps. And as we've talked, if you make it too cumbersome
Hmm.
to execute, people just abandon it. They think, oh my God, if I make a mistake, I get caught, it destroys my organization.
Right.
And the path for human beings, as we've talked before, in anything in industrialization or sustainability or eco-friendly, it's never a direct straight line.
Yeah.
You can't just turn on
Turn
the
it
light
on.
switch and everyone's ready to go. So I think what they're doing is they're taking a step back to analyze the best and most effective way to go forward, because I don't think that the framers for this have an intent of eliminating this, hey, go back to polluting like crazy, but trying to make it a little more friendly for companies to step into it, get used to it, and move along this
Right.
path.
And not
So
at great costs.
yeah, and I
Right.
think, and there are companies, countries, Italy backed
Yes.
off completely and said no, because they know Italy as a country is a little challenged with managing infrastructural support, even from taxation and a few other things. And so I think Italy stepped back and said, hey, hold on, this is going to be really challenging. So, I think a simplification of that process is in works.
That's a good rephrasing because some of the articles I was combing through in research for this were positioning this as a political ploy, but it sounds like it's more a just realities of business and really needing better tools. And the fact of the matter is that transparency just really isn't there from fiber forward at the way that consumers would like
We
us
don't
to
live in
think
a
it
black and
is.
white world. I'm
Yes.
sure there are political agendas at play too
Yeah.
along this whole gray spectrum, but I really believe it does make sense uh, to be thoughtful about next steps.
That's great. Okay, so now going into the world of retail, a story that I really quite love, Gap is back. I mean, this is a legacy brand that's been around, gosh, for eons now, it
Yeah.
feels. And it's kind of interesting, not only are they back for significant increases in revenue and so forth, but, I'm seeing some of their marketing campaigns that made them successful in the 80s and 90s really starting making their way to mainstream once again. So, why don't you share a little insight into some of the successes the Gap is seeing and maybe what attributes to that?
Yeah. Net sales have risen about 2% year over year. So it's a modest gain, but it's a
But that
positive
still
gain.
equates to 3.5 billion. I mean,
Well, in
that's
overall
right.
revenue, but I
Okay.
think the
It's pretty
2%
good.
gain is good. I think the operating margins improved 7.5%, which is a
It's
really,
great.
really good thing. And I think that's a sign of Richard Dixon's leadership.
Mhm.
Uh, Richard came over from Mattel. He brought with him a pretty good sense of organization and skill, and they really credit him with kind of organizing the company. For
Mhm.
so many years, Gap was this America's brand, and you would walk into the stores and you'd just be confused.
Mhm.
Quality would be suspect, focus would be suspect, and I think one of the great steps that Richard did was also bring in Zach Posen.
Oh, right.
Fantastic
Yes.
designer in his own right, understands collections, understands the pulse of the American consumer, and I
Yeah.
think doing that, bringing celebrities to kind of hype Old Navy, which is
Mhm.
a pretty large percentage of their overall revenue. And then, like so many groups are doing, we'll talk about another topic later on today, but they're closing underperforming stores. We're
Right.
seeing a big shift in um, closing stores that don't make sense.
Right.
The balance between brick and mortar and online is always a conversation and an evolution. Their online sales actually grew 6%. They're about 39% of the overall
Yeah.
company sales, and I think that's a pretty tremendous percentage when we look at these
It's
things.
good growth, but it also demonstrates that you can't completely abandon brick and mortar. They really do rely on those sales, but being smart about where they're profitable and where they're not makes a lot of sense. And it's showing because they're a healthy company. Once again, they're not only relevant to consumers, but they've got cash reserves and all
Yeah.
kinds of really positive success.
They still have work to do. Banana Republic, I'm not sure, has really found
Hmm.
its way. Athleta,
Right.
every time I walk into Athleta, I think it's a beautiful store. I think it's well merchandised. The quality, attention to detail is there. Athleta might be a slightly different
Yeah.
conversation than the Gap or than
Banana.
Banana Republic. You look at Banana Republic, and I'm just not sure they're sensing the whole ultra modern thing. They're kind of rediscovering maybe some old vintage, and I'm not sure how it's working. But I think there's still work to go there. And
Yeah.
Athleta could be more of a condition of the
Tariffs.
softening, well, tariffs, but we're also seeing a softening a little bit in the overall performance market, right? Nike's down, Lululemon's down,
Yeah, but again, is
Athleta.
that because of synthetics being in regions that are of higher taxation now with the tariffs?
I think it's a saturation issue.
Oh,
I think you're having Aloe come in, you're having all these other brands come in, and they're slicing
they're
the
all taking
pie.
a piece of it.
And so I
Yeah,
think there is a certain amount of revenue that category can do. And when you add all these big players together, the pie continues to get sliced a little bit
that makes
less for
sense.
each person. And so
Yeah.
I would say Athleta, I'm still impressed with their merchandising assortment. I'm impressed with their quality overall. And I think it's just how do you get your piece of that pie and how do you discover what that volume is going to look like?
Speaking of brick and mortar getting trimmed, Nordstrom change is happening there.
Yeah.
Big change, lots of levels of change. Let's
Yeah.
talk about that, Brett.
Well, they take it at private. It's been
Yes,
pulled
no
off
longer
the New York
yes.
Stock Exchange. The family owns about 49.9%. El
Oh,
Puerto de Liverpool.
opposite.
Oh, sorry, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
They negotiated well.
50.1. They get a little
They
bit
got a
more.
$6.25 billion acquisition and they still remain in, the primary
That's
ownership
right,
seat. Yeah.
50.1%. And El Puerto de Liverpool, a fantastic department store in
Yeah.
Mexico. Really upper end. Every time I walk into a Liverpool, it is well manicured, really curated. And they've taken the 49.9%.
Well,
So
that might, we did notice in that post COVID era, the stores really trimmed down on inventory, trimmed down on curation. It felt like the brands that were there, they were kind of the same old brands you'd see
mhm.
everywhere. And they lost that wonderful discovery element that they really became known for. So I'm hoping that this transition brings a fresh eye and maybe some of that curated experience back into the stores.
Liverpool definitely celebrates the unique, the better, the well
Mhm.
merchandised. I think they are a nice pair if you look at the legacy of Nordstrom's, the
Hmm.
customer service, the merchandising of the store, things like that, that's a good pair. But I still think there's an assortment conversation that needs to happen.
Yeah.
Maybe that transition will help that. They are also reducing their footprint and
Yes.
optimizing.
Cost
Yeah,
cutting,
they're doing all those
store
things.
shutdowns, kind of all
And this
those
is kind of
things
the
that
name of the
happen.
game,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Realigning, trying to figure that out.
Repositioning the brand, all of
Yeah.
those things. So, a brand that we have long admired for its quality, Laura Piana, just had a big win in court. They had a copycat brand really go after them, and I'm glad to see that they they went out ahead on this.
Yeah, the court favored in favor of Laura Piana. There was this injunction barring Elante from doing these similar styles.
Yeah.
There is this fine balance that happens in the industry with people reinterpreting, quote,
Yes.
the styling, but it was
It was overt
it was pretty
because
overt.
not only was it a copycat style, but they were photographing their shoes in front of Laura Piana
Yeah,
stores. Like they were taking a lot of their own graphic elements and folding it into their
I
marketing.
think their new little sub brand was Pora Liana. So I don't know if
Right.
that sounds similar enough, but yeah.
Doing things with meta tags and so forth on their website. So a lot of things that would be considered kind of cheating. Like it's
Yeah,
one thing to knock off a product, but it's another to actually steal the brand's
yeah.
iconography, and
And that's always a
trademarks.
challenge. It is such an expense for brands today to manage IP and
It is.
trademark, and it's good to see that they they manage to
They
do
have
that.
something to protect. I mean, that is an uber luxury brand
Yeah,
and very well established and very, very well known for its quality. So I can understand their fight to hold their place
yeah.
uh,
It's a big
in that.
decision because you're investing a lot of dollars.
Well, usually we like to wrap up on a really fun story. Uh, this time, I think we're going the other direction because we wanted to have all the fun stuff at the top of this brief. But something we can't shut this down today without discussing that we've had major global developments over the weekend. Of course, I'm talking the strikes in Iran, and so we just kind of want to talk through some of the considerations from a business perspective.
Yeah. War for me is never a good decision. Sometimes you're forced into it to protect long-term goals. Two sides of this story are: look, most people in the world do not want Iran to have nuclear weaponization. It'll force others to have nuclear weaponization. Reducing that makes sense.
Mhm.
And that school of thought believes that they were on their way to doing that. It wasn't just energy,
Mhm.
right? And so the disruption situations are um, out there. That the
Yeah.
opportunities for trade to get disrupted through the Straits of Hormuz, and you know,
Yeah,
with
you look at flight patterns and boating and all of those
yeah,
things, all of that stuff has to be reconfigured and some of that's going to be a long workaround.
yeah, I would say behind the scenes, you really think that these people are kind of like at odds and they're now warring. They don't talk. Behind the scenes, there's probably a lot of conversations. The US is talking to Iran, Iran's talking to Saudi. They don't want, there has been an embargo in Iranian oil for a while, but that Iranian oil continues to flow around the world. It ships out of Iran into Malaysia, gets relabeled.
Repackaged.
China's the biggest producer. So they
Yeah.
don't want to reduce they don't want to reduce their supply and their income stream. You know, Iran countries, businesses find a way to get around things like that. And I would
Hmm.
say behind the scenes, there is active negotiation going on. Question is were the strikes effective? That's a big question mark out there. Intelligence, says that they moved a whole lot of stuff out
Yeah.
before those strikes happened. I think maybe further refinement of the uranium might have slowed down, but you don't know.
Yeah.
And you know, the next few months are going to be a big question mark.
Hmm.
Are we going to see supply chain disruption? Are we going to see rerouting of ships like when Yemeni and all those said, hey, look, we're going to go bomb ships and,
Right.
the Suez and slow that down, and people are going to have to go around the horn. These are all big, big question marks, but, it does create more volatility. The world
Right.
is pretty volatile today,
Yeah.
in a number of different places. And so, in chaos, there's opportunity. You have to recognize the ways to manage through those situations. You have to plan for those things. And, human beings are messy. So we have to just be able to keep a watch on evolving situations and see what happens. I don't think
Okay.
we're going to see, for us in the synthetics who are doing synthetics, it's petroleum based, oils right now, I think $55-$60 a barrel. There's this concern that it would jump to the 1970s level of over $100 a barrel. I don't think that's going to happen. We have a massive glut of oil out there. So I don't think that we're going to see rises in petroleum prices and in fact rises in synthetics unless it's artificially created. So I would say it's just a wait and see.
And just like we always say, just make sure you're planning, and plan for time, plan for potentially a little added cost here and there, freight cost or whatever
Yeah.
might go up. Just plan these things, and then there won't be surprises, right?
Well, there'll still be
They'll be
surprises. Just
surprises.
plan
Yeah.
for them.
Just put it as a category on your spreadsheet. There will be a surprise.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you for joining us on this clothing brief. And don't forget, we'll be right back here next week at noon to share with you the latest updates. We have some wonderful new releases rolling out on our longer format clothing culture podcast, of course, available on all podcast platforms. We've got an update on brand strategy, what's happening in this new year of 2025. The last time we did a marketing conversation was in our first season, and it's still to date one of our hottest episodes. So this should be a good one for you. Many other conversations coming soon. So don't forget to subscribe to stay apprised of upcoming episodes.